It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you today, early morning California time, but a great honor. I can't think of any place I'd rather be right now than right here with all of you. So thank you for the invitation. So in organizations, we have enormous problems. Management, traditional management, is utterly broken. It's broken beyond repair, cannot be fixed. And traditional management basically started on October 5th of 1841 with a train wreck in the eastern seaboard of the United States. Two locomotives collided with each other. The Western Railway commissioned an engineer to investigate. So Major George Whistler and applied theories from the Prussian military system and came up with the first business organization chart. He came up with departments, divisions, chains of command, lines of authority, silos, titles. So it's muted there for a second. I don't know where I left off. Traditional management's broken, started with a train wreck. It's where we got position, power, titles, chains of command, organizational boundaries, silos, bureaucracy, hierarchy, and all the rest. The world's first organization chart came from the train wreck in 1841. Well, that theory may have made sense in 1841. It does not make sense in the year 2020. We have information that moves at light speed at any place on the planet to any other place on the planet at virtually zero cost. We have accelerating technology changes, blockchain, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, robotics, nanotechnology, genetic engineering. Now we have 4D printing. We've already blasted past 3D printing. We now have 4D printing. We also have major social and generational changes. Some workplaces are trying to manage 5 generations in a single workplace with dubious results. So we've got a lot of challenges. Gary Hamel's management lab estimates that the indirect and direct cost of excess bureaucracy in the US alone is $3 trillion per year. That's 1/7 of the entire US economy. If you extrapolate that globally, it's more like 12 or 13 trillion dollars. Engagement statistics are terrible. Most engagement surveys show that 70% of workers are disengaged, perhaps 20% actively disengaged. And active disengagement means that these workers are actively undermining their own workplaces through sabotage, absenteeism, bullying, drug use, dysfunction of every kind. That costs about $500 billion every year in the US alone. And surveys show that most executives doubt their own ability to manage complexity. An IBM study a few years ago demonstrated that. And so we have leaders who are literally exhausted with anxiety, losing sleep at night, losing their health, unable to cope with the social, generational, technological, accelerating changes that we're all experiencing. And that's not a good thing. It's not a healthy thing. It's not a productive thing. So it's very costly. And on top of all this cost and bureaucracy and dysfunction, we wrap our workplaces up in dehumanizing language. So we talk about people as resources. We talk about human resources. The fact is that people are not resources, people are human beings. and deserve to be treated as such and respected as such. We talk about direct reports as if people are file folders. We talk about head count as if people don't have bodies. We talk about man hours as if women don't exist. We wrap all of these, this dysfunctional language around our current dysfunctional workplaces and wonder why people are disengaged. So is there a path out of management purgatory? Well, I'd like to think that there is. And I'd like to think that part of the answer has to do with managing enormous complexity with great simplicity. So this is a guy named D. Hock. He's the founder of the Visa credit card system. And he coined the term chaotic organization, which is a balance between the polarity of chaos and order. And he famously said that complex rules cause simple, stupid behavior. And simple rules lead to complex, intelligent behavior. Can we create organizations organized around simple rules and simple principles that allow us to free the human spirit, to be productive, to build relationships, to acquire resources, to do one's best work? England called Swindon Circle. It's a roundabout, but it's actually 7 roundabouts in one. So it's a large roundabout with 5 roundabouts within and 1 roundabout in the very center. And this roundabout has been in existence for 60 years. The interesting thing about roundabouts is that they revolve around very simple principles. The first principle is you yield to the cars already in the roundabout. And secondly, you position your car in the correct lane to exit. As long as you follow those 2 rules, you can navigate any roundabout anywhere in the world. And you can follow multiple paths to a destination in this roundabout using simple rules. The fact is that roundabouts are 15 to 80% more productive than traditional intersections. They have far less pollution than traditional intersections, and they have far greater safety records than traditional intersections. Managing great complexity with great simplicity through reducing complex rules to very simple rules and allowing people to manage themselves to get from one destination to the other. So, can this work in the business world? Yeah, I'd like to think so. So my story is, when I got out of college, I met a young entrepreneur here in California named Chris Roofer. And together we started a company, a high-tech food processing company here in Northern California. And it was very successful. It grew from 0 to about $100 million in sales. But we defaulted to the traditional organizational design because we really didn't know any better. And so we had a pyramid with our founder on top, and then we had a layer of managers, of which I was one. And then we had a layer of supervisors and a layer of coordinators. And then we had at the bottom of the pyramid, we had everyone else that did the real work. And we started to collect lessons from this experience. One lesson is that as we watched people come into the workplace, we realized that every one of those individuals is already a manager in their own personal life. So every one of those people is making gigantic, life-changing decisions on their own without a boss. They're deciding who to date, who to marry, where to go to college, what to do for a living, whether to buy a house or a car or have children, gigantic life-altering decisions without a boss. Which begged the question, if people know what to do at work and how to do it, why do they need a boss? And so we progressed, and after about 7 years, Chris left to start a new company. And that company was called Morningstar. And I joined him. I was the financial controller. And we were working out of a little tiny farmhouse in a dusty canal bank here in California. We had a core team of about 24 people. And this was exactly 30 years ago, March of 1990. And one day, Chris came into the farmhouse and said, you know, I'd like to call a meeting of colleagues and talk about organization. How are we going to set up this company? And so we were building this factory. We had about 4 months to go before the factory needed to be ready. And so we said, sure. And we met with him at night in a construction trailer out on the job site. We sat around in a circle facing each other on steel folding chairs, and he handed out a document called the Morningstar Team Principles. It basically boiled down to two things. The first principle was that human beings should not use force or coercion against other human beings. And if you think about that, it's the foundation of all law everywhere in the world. So every law against assault and battery and theft and burglary and kidnapping and murder and all the rest is based on that principle. And the second principle is that people should keep the commitments they make to each other. And if you think about that principle, it's also the foundation of law, especially civil and contract law, which would mean nothing if parties didn't do what they said they were going to do. And so we discussed and debated these principles for a couple of hours. At the end of the evening, we just looked at each other around the circle and said, we really don't have any objections to these principles. And they make perfect sense, they're self-evident, and so we adopted them as the entire governance of the enterprise. And as the 24 of us filed out of that trailer, at that very moment, we became a self-managed enterprise. So this was March of 1990, and we still had a lot of work to do. We had hundreds of contractors on the job site, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, constructing, fabricating, welding. We had thousands of hectares of tomatoes coming up out of the ground up and down the state of California. We had to hire hundreds of employees to operate the factory and drive the trucks. We had vital equipment on ocean cargo freighters en route from Parma, Italy, out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, waiting to go through the Panama Canal. But finally, on July 16th of 1990, we turned on the factory and we produced 90 million pounds, I think that's 45 million kilograms of industrial tomato concentrate for the world market. And we changed the cost structure of our entire industry virtually overnight. And we did it without a single human boss, manager, supervisor, vice president of any kind. We did it with human beings, self-managing, fulfilling their individual roles, working together as a team, building a factory, and bringing it to life. So the company went on to grow. We added another factory and then another factory. We expanded operations up and down our supply chain toward customers and remote warehouses across North America and toward the supply in terms of farming and harvesting and transplanting and trucking. We became the largest tomato processor in the world. Yeah, I believe everyone in North America has eaten our product. It goes into everything in the grocery store, from ketchup to salsa, pizza sauce, spaghetti sauce, barbecue sauce, steak sauce, every conceivable product. And we export worldwide. So I believe most people in Europe and probably many people in India have eaten our product as well. And we've never deviated from our two core principles. Don't use force and keep commitments. So naturally, this attracted interest from the outside world. Business author Gary Hamel, who wrote a new book called Humanocracy with Michael Zanini, came out for a visit in 2010. In 2011, we ended up on the cover of the Harvard Business Review, which described us as the world's most creatively managed company. So how does this possibly work? Well, we start with principles. And principles are crucial. We think that the two principles we adopted are the two most foundational principles of human interaction. They are to human beings what gravity is to physics. If you imagine a world where everyone abandoned the use of force against others, we wouldn't need armies or navies or police or locks on our doors. And we know that's not realistic. We understand that's not reality, but that's not really the point. The point is the closer we approach that ideal state, the more space we open up for human happiness and harmony and prosperity and teamwork. Imagine a world where everyone did what they said they were going to do. What an amazing world that would be to live in. And again, we understand that's not realistic, that's not reality, but again, that's not the point. The point is the closer we approach that ideal state, the better off we are as human beings, and the more space we open up for human happiness and harmony and prosperity and teamwork and all the good things of life. And by the way, keeping commitments has quantifiable, measurable, economic, and financial value. If you have two stores that are adjacent, and one store has the item you want to buy 100% of the time with 100% reliability, the other store is only 90% reliable. The store that's 90% reliable would need to discount its product 20% to be competitive with a store that's 100% reliable. And this logic applies to individual human contributors in the workplace as well. Commitment keeping is quantifiably valuable, as well as being the right thing to do. So these two principles are the most foundational principles of human interaction. They are the core of Morningstar. We have never deviated from them in 30 years. They have allowed us to grow from zero to become the largest tomato processor in the world with thousands of employees and $1 billion in sales. We ask people to give up power. That's not easy. Our business schools train people how to advance on a career ladder. We're used to titles and position power in organizations. That's what happened with the train wreck in 1841. So people are used to having power, and it's very difficult to give it up. But we ask people to give it up because at Morningstar, there is no command authority. No one has any authority to tell another person what to do, to stop doing X and start doing Y, to unilaterally fire another person. No one has power over another person. Everything is accomplished by request and response. Now, you do have an obligation to respond to requests, but everything is based on request and response. We see people, we see human beings as the ultimate reality. Immanuel Kant, 18th century German philosopher, said human beings are the end. They're not a means to an end, they are the end. And that's our belief as well. Every business that's ever existed or ever will exist is to supply one of 8 commercial needs of human beings. So once you get past food, clothing, and shelter, there's communication, transportation, entertainment, personal security, and healthcare. That's it. Every business that's ever existed or ever will exist is established to supply one of those 8 human needs. And so human beings are the ultimate reality. Teams are concepts, organizations are concepts, departments are concepts, countries are concepts. Only human beings are real. Only human beings can act. Only human beings can make decisions. Human beings are the ultimate reality. And we already talked about managing great complexity with great simplicity. We have two simple rules that govern all interaction between human beings at Morningstar. Just like a roundabout, two simple rules. Very simple. It's about governing great complexity with great simplicity. It can be done. The other important point is that we slash what Gary Hamel calls the management tax. So around the world, on average, for every 10 workers, there's probably one manager, and managers almost always make more than the people they manage. So if we imagine a startup with 10 workers, they probably have one boss who's making more than they are. So if these workers are making $30,000 a year, then they have a boss probably making $90,000 a year. The great opportunity here is that we can recognize that each one of these 10 workers is already a manager in his or her own personal life. We can amplify their commercial management skills, give them all a $5,000 a year raise, and suddenly we don't need the boss on top. Or we can redeploy that person to do things that are more value added and strategic. And we've just saved ourselves $40,000 a year, every year. Now this company scales by a factor of 10 so that we have 100 workers. Well, how many bosses do they need?
खाली उसका वीडियो बड़ा दिखने का ठीक है खाली उसका पकड़ को या
So I couldn't quite hear that, but how many bosses would they need? They need 11 because they'd have 10 bosses, but now the 10 bosses need a boss. So now we've got 11 bosses on top, and the boss on top probably makes more than the 10 bosses that he or she manages. So now we've got the opportunity here is we can equip the 100 workers with commercial management skills. We can give them all a $5,000 a year raise. We don't need the 10 managers. We don't need the manager of the 10 managers. And we've just saved ourselves $600,000 a year, the net present value of which is probably $4 million over a decade. So all things being equal, if you have two companies and one figures out how to slash the management tax, the other one continues down the path of traditional management, which one is going to be more successful over time? And we create real leadership. So zero command authority is one of the hallmarks of self-management. Zero means zero. No one has any authority to tell another person what to do. This leads to natural leadership, leadership that is earned through trust, respect, and communication. It's not handed to someone on a silver platter. Leadership that is earned is stronger, better leadership. When you acquire leadership by simply attaining a promotion or a position and you have the ability to exercise command authority so that any command you issue, you have the expectation of obedience, that causes leadership muscles to atrophy, to become weaker. It causes weaker, poorer leadership. Natural leadership is stronger, better leadership. And we have leadership throughout the entire organization. Everyone can be a leader and everyone can be an innovator. Those opportunities are available throughout the organization, which creates a giant network of innovation and leadership, which is very difficult to compete against. And we consider work to be play. So we try to gamify every role. If you don't have a boss walking around to compliment you or reprimand you, you have to be able to tell yourself how you're doing. And we do that through gamifying work. People select scorecards that make sense for them in their particular role. We call these stepping stones because we consider them stepping stones toward perfection. We don't benchmark other companies, other sectors, other industries. We benchmark perfection. So perfection for a cost metric is 0. Perfection for a quality metric is 0 defects. Perfection for an efficiency metric is 100%. And then we express these in time series line graphs showing trends and publish them transparently across the enterprise. So people can initiate conversations with their peers, each of whom has an equal voice. If the trend line is bending down, what can I do to help you turn the trend line around and make it better? So this leads to real accountability, real responsibility. And we instantiate this responsibility with contracts called colleague letters of understanding. We ask people to navigate their work environment to select colleagues with whom they wish to execute these contracts. They identify their purpose. We call it a personal commercial mission statement. We identify the what of work, what processes. What are the processes for which you agree to be fully accountable? What is the scope of your decision-making authority with respect to each process? What are the stepping stones with which you agree to gamify your role at Morningstar? And we find that people generally contract with between 7 and 12 of their fellow colleagues. These are enforceable contracts. They are the infrastructure that represents an entire replacement for bureaucracy. There's no chain of command, no hierarchy, no command authority, but we replace that with infrastructure of contracts by and between peers, each of whom has an equal voice with respect to matters that affect them. So this is a frame from a time-lapse video of our colleague letter of understanding database in our first factory. I'm the teal dot in the upper left, and this frame is in, this movie is in constant motion as people negotiate and renegotiate their roles and responsibilities. So this is just a snapshot of a movie. And so this is a dynamic network of individuals, and we are constantly connecting and reconnecting in response to the marketplace, in response to the needs of the business, and any risks and any opportunities that arise in our particular sector. A few years ago, we took our database of colleague letters of understanding, we digitized it, we took it to a computer lab at the University of California, and they projected it in three-dimensional space. This is the picture they took. Now, if this were a time-lapse movie, it would be in constant motion as people negotiate and renegotiate their roles and responsibilities. But this is a snapshot. It shows the connections between people. It looks like a spider web. There's no up or down. There's no east or west. There are only connections between peers, each of whom has an equal voice with respect to matters that affect them. Spider silk by weight is 5 times stronger than steel. This is robust, resilient, strong. If people leave, it doesn't matter. The remaining humans in the network will reallocate, renegotiate their roles and responsibilities immediately in response to any changes in the network composition. So lest you think we're the only, Morningstar is the only strange company engaged in this journey, there are many others. You probably recognize the one in the middle, Jaipur Rugs. The Hire Group, Bird Store, W.L. Gore. Hire is the world's largest appliance manufacturer. Their chairman, Zhang Ruimin, reads Immanuel Kant, an 18th century German philosopher who said people are ends, not means to an end. He believes that. He took his company of 70,000 workers and turned them into 4,000 self-managed teams. You may recognize this gentleman. He is my friend, Nan Kishore Chowdhury, the founder of Jaipur Rugs. I was very privileged to spend time in his home last year and learn about their company. He has 40,000 carpet weavers in villages across India from the untouchable class, and he is changing their lives. He cut out the middlemen who were taking profits out of the carpet weaving chain, and is allowing these women, the weavers, to send their kids to school, sometimes for the first time, to improve their lives across villages in India. He's taking his carpet weavers to awards shows in Europe. They are giving keynote speeches at conferences. He is changing lives across India through the power of self-management. I'm sure you recognize this. This is the beautiful double helix of DNA. I like this because it's a great example of managing great complexity with great simplicity. So again, we've got the concept of two. We've got two strands. These strands are very simple. They're made up of sugar and phosphate. And yet between them, they contain all the information needed to create every living thing on the face of the earth. So we are able to manage great complexity with great simplicity in nature, and now as we're finding out in human organizations as well. Just like DNA, we have two simple rules. Don't use force and keep commitments. The two most fundamental principles of human interaction. So how do we move forward? Well, I think we need to embrace people like this gentleman, Immanuel Kant, whom I referenced a couple of times. If we believe in free will, that means that we really need to rethink our traditional management system of command and control. We need to invite people into a conversation where they can help us co-create a pathway to a better future state, where people have a voice, where they can be self-managed, where their skills and talents and gifts can be augmented with technology, where we listen to them, where we respect them, and we create organizations of greatness that will last for generations to come. So with that, thank you very much, and I'll turn it back to Harini.
Amazing. So while questions come up, Doug, I think I have a couple of questions right up my sleeve. A few of them have come from our participants, and there's something that I picked up from what you said. You spoke about no command and control, but it's all request and response. So that talks about actually driving a very different kind of a behavior. It's about a complete change of the mindset. How did this changing of the mindset happen in the Morningstar company? That one meeting, sitting around a table, I mean, sitting in a circle and discussing, did that make a difference? And how did that mindset change happen? Because you said as you walked out of that truck, you were all self-managed. Is self-management that easy? How did that behavior change trigger?
Yeah, okay, so we walked out of the trailer, and at that moment became a self-managed enterprise organized around the two principles, one of which is that you have no command authority. So command authority from that moment forward did not exist. Now we have people who had grown up in traditional organizations who had position power in the past, and who then tried to exercise that power in the self-managed environment, but they found that it didn't work because people would not listen to them. So culturally, it was pretty much immediate. Command authority did not exist. And so anyone who tried to exercise it, they could call a meeting, but no one would show up because they didn't respect the issuance of a command. And so people eventually that had that mindset self-selected themselves out of the organization and left. Now, the culture simply doesn't tolerate it.
That's interesting. the right people who aligned with the culture stayed back and the others just left. And I think that's the best way a change like that can be driven. There's a question here which has come on the chat window. In the Morningstar company, how are people chosen for a role? How is hiring done? How often are contracts renegotiated? And what happens when someone does not deliver on commitments? How do you treat when someone, so there's another question from another participant, and I'll kind of blend them together. What happens when someone does not deliver on commitments, or when you are driving a behavior of self-management? There could be misuse of the kind of autonomy, of the transparency that's there. There could be misuse. So how do you deal with such situations?
Right. Well, let me touch on the hiring process first. Hiring is rigorous. So it's not unusual for a prospective employee hired to participate in multiple group interviews over a period of a few months before a hiring offer is made. The hiring is done by peers. So peers hire peers. Electricians hire electricians. Mechanics hire mechanics. Clerks hire clerks. Janitors hire janitors. Why? Because no one's more invested in getting the right people on the bus than the people who will be working side by side with that person for perhaps years to come. So when everyone has an obligation to identify the need for additional talent and to initiate the acquisition of talent. So if an electrician realizes that we've added more horsepower, we need additional electrical talent, they'll candidates, but then the electricians are the ones who do the interviewing, and the electricians are the ones who make the hiring decision. So that's how we get people on board. How do we handle differences between people? We have what's called, or solve problems, or address performance issues, or whatever the case may be. We have a process called the gaining agreement process. And I'll type that in the chat here. The gaining agreement process is a process that we needed right from the start to resolve any possible differences between colleagues, ranging from trivial differences like, what type of paper should we use in the copy machine, to asking someone to leave the company. So again, everything's based on request and response, and everyone has an obligation to make direct requests to their fellow colleagues. And so it starts with a request. So if I see a colleague who is not performing well, and I don't believe that they have the capacity to improve, I can ask them to leave the company, and they can respond in one of three ways. They can say no, they can say yes, or we can renegotiate some third option. Maybe they offer to take some additional training or approach something else. So, okay, so if they say no and I still believe in my request, then I can escalate it to a second step, which is mediation. We bring in a third party, could be any other colleague who understands the process and has some subject matter expertise. And their job is just to offer their best advice. So we have the same discussion. And at the end of that process, we either agree, disagree, or negotiate something else. And if the person still refuses, and I still believe in the request, we can escalate to a third step, which is to bring in a group of mediators. And their job is the same as the first mediator, to just listen to both sides and offer their best advice. At the end of that process, we still have the same three options. So if the person still disagrees and I still believe in the request, then we have agreed in advance by subscribing to these principles that we will document our difference in writing and submit it to final binding arbitration, because it needs to end somewhere. And this has been in place for 30 years. It works to resolve any conceivable difference between human beings, And it's not new. It's been around for thousands of years.
Interesting. And particularly what amused me during those several conversations that I had with you, Doug, on WhatsApp is every time I would use the word employees, Doug would replace it with colleagues. so I knew that you're very careful about not using terminologies like this, which are jargons and which are not bringing the human element back in the workplace. So I think that's a good practice, and it makes it feel a lot more valued when you don't use terminologies like this. So in that context, there are a couple of people here who are interested to know, when you have new colleagues joining a self-managed organization, what's your recommendation? Now, they could be coming from a very different kind of a structure, a traditional hierarchical structure. But if they are coming on board, let's say the Morningstar, then how would you induct them into the culture of being self-managed?
Well, it starts with a hiring process that I described earlier. So the hiring process is rigorous and can be somewhat lengthy. The interviews, and I've done a lot of recruiting for Morningstar, and the peer interviews that I've been a part of, people get to the technical capabilities very quickly. They generally dispose of those very quickly with some very key questions. And then most of an interview is spent on one's ability to navigate and self-manage in this culture. And so as the interview process progresses, the candidate is learning about self-management, learning about the challenges, learning about the opportunities, learning, all the nuances of self-management at the same time that the interviewers, the peers, are learning about the candidate. So that education process starts during recruiting. Once a person comes on board, there's a very lengthy and intense orientation session, day and a half, where we dive deeply into these principles. We do role plays, we do lots of multimedia and small group work and problem solving, and when we really walk through the parameters of self-management. And then we have ongoing coaching, mentoring, facilitation. We have ongoing ad hoc trainings of different kinds and mini sessions. At one point we had a mini MBA, which was like a 100-hour program over 4 quarters, where people would learn commercial business skills like negotiation and mediation and financial literacy and cost accounting and financial accounting and strategic planning and a number of other things. So the education process is continuous, never ending, ongoing, and they get a really good orientation after hire.
So we have a lot of questions coming in, Doug. So what I'll do is I'll unmute some of our participants who can articulate their question better. I don't want to be reading it, without understanding what they really want to say. So let me start with Vidya. Vidya, I'm just unmuting you, Vidya. You can voice your question.
Hello, sir. My question was, how do you draw the line between fulfilling commitment and becoming stressed or burning out and becoming overly self-critical?
Doug is on. Doug is muted.
You're on mute, Doug.
Yeah. Yes. Again, it's just a moment.
Good.
Yep.
Okay. So in a self-managed environment, people are responsible for themselves. Sometimes the term that you'll hear is organizational adulting, but it's the concept of this guy, Immanuel Kant, it's the concept of free will. We respect free will. And people, if you believe in free will, it's no one's job to motivate anyone else. People are either going to motivate themselves or they're not. And that includes motivating themselves to take care of themselves and engage in wellness activities and rest so that they avoid burnout. People are responsible for their own self-care. They're responsible for their own training and development. They're responsible for their own happiness. They're responsible for everything about themselves. And so that's how it works.
I think your response to Vidya is actually leading into what your response would be for Sahil. So Sahil Nair, we have two Sahils here. So Sahil Nair, I'm unmuting you now. Would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Thanks so much, Harini. Doug, thank you so much. It was a wonderful session. I think you've touched on the facets, self-managed teams really well. My question is going to be slightly tactical, operational, but very important because that's really where the rubber hits the road. The question which I put on the chat, I'm going to read it out for you, is how do we take colleagues away from their to-do state, right? We all maintain to-dos. So how do you take colleagues away from a to-do state to a to-be state? A to-be state, because what I really mean is most of us would have an immediate task orientation. We have 15 things to do. I need to tick this box, tick this box, tick this box. I do it, I finish it off. To a larger purpose that really fuels the passion to be self-managed, because at the end of the day, not everyone is going to have the kind of motivation internally. A lot of people like to be guided. A lot of people like to be mentored. Sorry. A lot of people like to be guided. A lot of people like to be mentored, like to be given direction, right? So how do you really take people on that journey? Some thoughts, some perspectives from your side, Doug.
Yeah, so again, it's a context of free will and respect for that. And so we had a commercial mission for a number of years that we started the company with, and it was very simply to produce tomato products that meet the product and service expectations of our customers in a cost-effective, environmentally responsible manner. And that's fine. That's what we did. That's what we do at Morningstar. But eventually, we realized over time that the real purpose of people coming to work is to improve their own lives. It's enlightened self-interest. People are there to, make a living for themselves and their families, and and develop themselves and whatever other goals they have in mind and their own personal inventory of needs. And so we have a real purpose at Morningstar, which is to create a vibrant work environment where people can flourish and realize their gifts and their highest potential. And so we want to create a great work environment for human beings. That's our real purpose. Yes, we make tomato products, but we want to create this great work environment. So with that in mind, people are going to decide whether to avail themselves of the full potential of that work environment, to take advantage of the opportunities there, to really craft a personal commercial mission that resonates with themselves and their fellow colleagues, to make the most of the opportunity. They're going to choose to do that or they're not. So it's really up to them. And again, it's nobody's job. It's not our job at Morningstar to motivate people. We're going to create an environment, and people are going to choose to motivate themselves or not. And that's pretty much how it works.
I can't help but say that at Semco style, we say that treat adults as adults, right? It applies across.
Absolutely. Nothing works like treating adults as adults. I think even when children are treated as adults, the conversations are much more productive. Tilak, we have Tilak with a question. Over to you, Tilak. I'm taking you off mute.
Sure. Hey, hi, Doug. This is Tilak here.
Morning.
So when you started the company back in the trailer, so you wouldn't have possibly thought about every function that is needed, right? So you would have started with, hey, I need manufacturing, I need certain things and so on. As the company progressed, many new functions would have got envisaged and created. For example, marketing may not have been there. Strategy may not have been there, or external communication may not have been there and so on. So who kind of thinks through that, hey, these functions are needed, and then who nominates themselves that these functions are needed? And how is it ensured that there is no duplication of work? Because when there is highly self-managed, there is a very good chance that there is duplication of work between, I don't want to call it departments because departments don't exist really, but functions, if for a better word. So how does it all happen?
Mhm. So, as I mentioned earlier, everyone has an affirmative obligation to identify the need for additional talent and to initiate the acquisition of additional talent. And everyone also has an overarching responsibility to address issues that come into their scope of awareness. So it's a concept of total responsibility. So I may be primarily responsible for a particular part of a factory, for example, but if I notice something in a different part of the factory that seems off or seems like it needs to be addressed, I own that issue. I now am an owner of that issue, and I have an affirmative obligation to address it directly myself or to make sure that I've shared that information with someone who can then address it in a more effective way. So these principles, again, it's about managing great complexity with great simplicity. And we find the principles cover 99.9% of conceivable situations. So someone is going to notice a duplication of efforts. And so as soon as that person becomes aware, comes into the scope of awareness, they have an obligation to deal with it, and they usually do. If they don't deal with it, it means they've chosen to ignore it and accept it, which may not be acceptable. It may be behavior that's counter to the colleague principles. And so we hope that someone will detect it, but we think the benefits of self-management far outweigh the risks of some issue, going ignored or undetected. So that's really, and the other concept here is one of decision rights. So we're very conscious of the idea of decision rights. So we understand all the processes that need to be executed to run the operation, all the marketing processes, the production, distribution, quality, administration, all the rest. We understand those. And with each process is a package of decision rights. So someone has to make decisions regarding each process. And those are called decision rights. And decision rights could be this person makes a decision, or it could be that this person makes a decision but requires input from others, or it could be that this person makes recommendations to another decision maker, or some other definition of decision rights. Decision rights are negotiable, as are process ownerships. Everything's negotiable. Decisions are generally owned by the individual or individuals who have the most expertise and are best equipped to make those decisions, but they are negotiable. And so it's quite possible to pre-allocate decision-making authority for strategic decisions or any other kind of decisions throughout the entire enterprise. So for a given decision, you already know in advance that this person owns the decision rights for that decision. So it makes things very clear. So we don't have a lot of confusion around who's going to make which decisions on a daily basis.
I think that also answers another question here, which is, you've actually answered it, but I'm just clarifying that who decides on the company goals is there's so much clarity that you don't really need an identified boss to decide on the company goals. It's just that there's a vision and there's a culture that drives people to achieve that vision and do it. We have Ishan Luthra, another good friend here, who has a bunch of questions actually. So Ishan, I'm taking you off mute. It'll be good if you can ask your questions.
Hi, Doug. How are you?
Good, thanks.
So actually, my first question was, in a self-managed company, who decides the compensation or the salary for the teammates? And is there profit sharing which is in it, or how do you manage it?
Then the second part was, is there profit sharing? Was that correct?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So there's no profit sharing. So we do operate on salaries. It's a seasonal operation. So we have about 400 year-round, full-time, year-round colleagues among all the operations. And then in July, we hire another 2,000 to 3,000 seasonal colleagues. And they work until mid-October. In fact, we just shut down our last factory last week. So the salaries of the year-round colleagues are determined by the market. So for example, when I was recruiting, I knew that to hire a full charge industrial electrician in this geographic area required a salary of $110,000 US a year. That's just the marketplace dictated that, and so that's what it was. And so a person is hired at a market dictated salary, and then at the end of the year, each factory has a representative compensation committee, and they meet with each colleague associated with that factory. And each colleague brings in their colleague letter of understanding, their stepping stones, graphs, and they sit down with the committee and discuss the year. And if a person wants an increase above the official government cost of living increase for that year, then they're required to present a business case, a bona fide business case to the committee and negotiate with the committee for that request. And that works extremely well. Most people don't ask for an increase above the cost of living because salaries are already quite good. In fact, the technicians, the mechanics, electricians, quality specialists are paid not that differently from Harvard and Stanford and Yale graduates, even though they have maybe a high school or a year or two of community college, because they're the best in the world at what they do, which admittedly is a very narrow specialty, but they are the best in the world at what they do and they're paid like it. And so if a person makes a business case, they negotiate. And if they reach an impasse, then they always have the gaining agreement process available to them. So it always gets resolved. And for the most part, I think people are very, very happy with the compensation.
So Ishan, since you brought the question around compensation, Abhijit and Anant have very similar questions. So I'll ask on their behalf, and it's a straightforward question. So Anant and Abhijit want to know, have you experienced employee turnover, attrition? I'm sure you must have. So if yes, then what are the top 3 reasons, the typical reasons for which attrition happens in a self-managed organization?
So I'll just share one reason that I already mentioned earlier, and that is that if we have a person who's come into the company who has been a traditional manager in the past, perhaps they are mid-career, perhaps they're in their 40s, they've grown up in a command and control organization, they've had titles and perks and power and command authority. Sometimes it's difficult for those people to make the transition to self-management, and so they sort of self-select out because their leadership style is not congruent with the culture. So I'll just say that. But then people are, they love it. They love working at Morningstar. I'll give you an example. We've had years where we've had a 100% return rate from one year to the next of seasonal workers who work very simple minimum wage jobs, and many of whom go back to Mexico for the winter time, who have been laid off for 8.5 months, 100% return rate from one year to the next after being laid off for 8.5 months. Why? Because they love coming back and seeing their friends. They love coming back and earning money for their families. I did a focus group with one group of seasonal workers a few weeks ago. They were absolutely joyful. They had so much fun working together. Many of them were tomato sorters. They're making minimum wage. Some of them have been working there every season for 30 years, since the year we started. So that was amazing to me. We have very low, when I measured turnover among seasonal workers, it was in the 90 percentile range. And our turnover among year-round colleagues, salaried colleagues, is very low. I mean, it's so low we don't even really measure it because, again, these people are paid well. They're respected as the best in the world at what they do. They have a large quantum of decision-making authority. If you think about a factory could easily cost $50 million US in equipment with maybe 15 mechanics. Each mechanic maybe has $6 or $7 million worth of equipment for which they are self-managers. They are managing strategy, process, operations, budgets, who's going to run the equipment, maintain it, policy, everything about it. Some of these mechanics are more assets under their control than many CEOs. So they're complete self-managers and completely engaged in the work of the business.
We have Rakesh Ranjan, who has a question around scaling up. Rakesh, I'm taking you off mute. You may ask your question.
Hi, Doug. Many thanks for your very enlightening session. So I just wanted to check if, as an organization, when you scale up, do you find a limit in terms of numbers of people, or if you want to expand geographically, do you see this as a limitation?
Thank you for the question. The answer is no. We see no limits to scale. In fact, the title of my last book is The No Limits Enterprise. We see absolutely no limits to scale whatsoever. There's well, I can refer back to the Hire group. Hire has 70,000 employees, most in China, but also globally, 4,000 self-managed teams. And so most of those teams are support teams like HR and IT and legal affairs and the rest, and accounting, etc. But 200 or 300 of them are customer-facing teams producing products and services. Then they have some innovation teams that are developing new businesses, and they're involved in healthcare and cattle ranching and video games and other things. I think they've produced a couple of unicorns by now. So we don't see any barriers to scale. In fact, I just put a note in the, oh, sorry, I sent it privately. I put a note in the chat box about promise theory. So a guy at the University of Oslo, Mark Burgess, theorized what he calls promise theory, which is commitment making and commitment keeping, which is one of the two foundations of Morningstar. And he's worked out the algebra of scaling promises, and there is no inherent barrier to scale. We think that this, we grew from 0 to thousands of employees based on 2 simple principles. And I showed you the little network chart that shows what the network looks like at this point in time, and it's probably larger now. If we added another factory and another, we don't see any barriers to scale whatsoever, and that's one of the beautiful things about simple principles is that they are truly scalable.
I think your network chart actually looks like cosmic, so it kind of goes very well with with the name of this community. Amazing. That's what struck me when you actually showed it up the first time. We have 2 of our colleagues from Simple Cell Institute India who have questions to ask. Mrunal, I'm unmuting you right now, and you can ask a question. And Mangesh can be ready to come up next. Mrunal.
Hi, Doug. This is Mrunal here, and it's like extremely interesting about what you're saying. I have one question to ask, which actually gave me a follow-up question too. Is because it is self-managed. One is, how does Morningstar arrive at the big picture? So because it's self-managed and because maybe there are different individuals, different colleagues having different imagination about what should be the big picture going forward, how do you arrive at a consensus for Morningstar? So that's the question. What's the process?
Okay, so you're talking about like kind of large strategic vision. Okay,
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll take it back to the concept of decision rights.
Okay.
So decision rights regarding strategy are just another class of decisions that must be made by someone. And so again, the question is, who is the best person or persons to make those large, visionary, strategic decisions? In our case, it happens to be our founder who knows more about our industry than anybody else in the world. But that doesn't mean that that's cut in stone or can't be negotiated. If someone else were to acquire strategic decision-making expertise in our industry, then that person could approach our founder and enter into a negotiation for full or partial ownership of strategic decision rights. Those opportunities are open all the time. And that principle of negotiation is throughout the organization, and it extends to every conceivable decision right that exists. So strategy is just another class of decision rights that somebody has to own. Now, I will say that when our founder settles on a direction, a strategy, he's very good about involving people early. So getting people involved, sharing his thinking, getting them involved in co-creating and shaping the initiative, that's very important. So it's not that he does own the decision rights, but he doesn't just drop them on people and expect them to comply, because he needs cooperation from the team in order to carry out the execution of any strategy. So it's very much a dialogue, a dialectic, and a co-creation process for decisions that he does own, ultimately.
Thanks. We have Mangesh who can go up next.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Doug, for your session. It's really eye-opening. My question is about innovation, and do you see a direct correlation between innovation and self-managed team? Do self-managed people who are motivated to come to work innovate better because they understand the why behind the job, and because they have the entire ownership of what they are doing? The ownership, I get a feeling that the innovation quotient should be higher. It got a little more reinforced after I typed the question when you started telling us that some of your workmen have or colleagues have multi-million-dollar responsibilities of equipments. So I will also ask the follow-up question is how does innovation from anyone percolate to other colleagues within the same company and across all of your companies? Sorry for the slight longish question, but I didn't want to miss out anything.
Thank you. So I'll describe innovation, and then I'll probably come back to the second part of your question. So innovation opportunities are available to everyone. Every one of these nodes in this network has the opportunity to innovate and to lead. And so an example of that would be we had a mechanic a couple of years ago who was walking through the factory and theorized a better way to handle materials, specifically chemicals. And so he sketched out some engineering diagrams and got buy-in for a change, a process change from colleagues who would be affected by a change. And he talked to a finance colleague and found some budget and implemented a little capital project and ended up saving millions of dollars. So those opportunities are available to everyone at all times, and many people take advantage of those opportunities, and it's very powerful, as you can imagine, to have a whole organization full of potential innovators, some of whom are active innovators, and it does come from that sense of ownership. Like, gee, you know, this is where I work, where I spend all of my career, and I have a chance to make this orders of magnitude better than it is today. That's very exciting to people. So now let me come back to the second part of your question. I wasn't sure I understood completely.
So the second part of the question is, now that someone has innovated or done an innovation, maybe in a process, in equipment, in any sense of it, how does this innovation percolate or spread across different divisions and across your multiple plants?
Yeah. So we're very active in spreading innovation. One of the principles of self-management is enlightened competition. So the Latin root word for competition is competere, which means seeking together or learning together. So it's not about one factory outshining another factory or making another factory look bad or fighting or hoarding information or anything like that. It's about turning competition into a game and then sharing information, learning from each other. If one factory is doing something better, let's go study it and learn and figure out how to apply it at our factory. So that is how it spreads, and it's very effective. So we had our northern factory had a cogeneration system where they generated their own electricity, and now that idea is spread to our southern factory. And so we learn from each other. We have an all-company meeting at least once a year. We get together, business units get together in small cohorts to share best practices. So we have lots of structures in place that allow these ideas to spread.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So questions that I could see here, I think all of them have been answered. We have another 10 minutes or so, 8 minutes at least, and then we wind up. Anyone else can want to ask a question, you can request for unmuting.
Yeah, hi, this is Vandana, Doug. Thanks for the session. I had a question more from perhaps your consulting area. In US, especially when you are doing any kind of transformation projects or you're helping organizations move to self-management, what are the key challenges that you come across? I mean, especially when I look at your Morningstar, the first one, coercion not to be used. And I think having worked in MNCs almost throughout my career, I understand that's a very common practice across large organizations.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with it?
Yeah. So the big challenge is, I would say, is middle management. So in the management pyramid, the managers in the middle, you know, it's often a question of fear. You know, fear of what's going to happen to me. You know, if we take this system and we create a system of self-management, are they even going to need managers in the future? And so that's a big challenge. You know, how do we get from this to a self-managed environment where everyone has an equal voice in matters that affect them? So I've actually had middle managers stand up in meetings and say, what's going to happen to me? Oftentimes the CEO or the leader of an organization has a vision of this desired future state, but can't really sell it to the middle managers because they resist, and it's like antibodies. They just rise up in resistance against the transformation. So I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges. And I think part of the solution is to engage leaders and influencers in a process of co-creation right from the beginning, where they can go on a retreat, perhaps, where they can engage in some open social technologies, where they can have really authentic, honest conversations and really get their fears and hopes out on the table, and get to a point where they can align around a set of experiments that they can run for 6 months to a year. Self-management experiments where we can, you know, these are yours, you own them, and we'll feed the ones that work, and we'll kill off the ones that don't work, and we'll crowdsource new experiments, and we'll just kind of start down a path on which every single person is aligned and in agreement. I think that's part of the solution here.
So, Doug, the reality is that a lot of the managers will not have jobs after that. And how does the whole thing work out? I mean, or will have to repurpose their current roles.
Yeah, so I don't think there's I would never approach a company and say a lot of your managers aren't going to have jobs after we, you know, engage in a transformation of your company. That would be, first of all, I don't think a company would buy that, and secondly, you know, it wouldn't work because there would be far too much resistance to it. You know, we have to find ways to create roles, and we've got a lot of very professional people in this network. I mean, they're world leaders in their fields, their respective fields, but they've chosen, again, using free will, they've chosen using free will to subscribe to these principles and to align their behavior with these principles. And so nobody's forcing them to work at Morningstar. If they don't like the principles, or they, you know, want to use force or whatever, then there's a whole world out there for them to play in. But if they want to align with Morningstar, then these are the principles, and this is the culture, and these are the choices that one has to make.
I think I missed a question from Krishna Kumar. Krishna Kumar, you can ask your question.
Yes, thanks, Doug and Harini. The question is, can the principles of self-management be applied to management of communities as well? While you've explained it in the corporate context, is that principle extendable to management of communities as well?
Yeah, I would like to think it's extensible to communities and countries and the whole world. So, you know, we're exponents of these principles, yes, at the corporate level, but one of the great stories that I've been a part of in the last few years is the University of Phoenix is the largest for-profit university system in the US. And a few years ago, they had a very visionary leader named Stephanie Glodden. And she ran a customer service and IT business unit. And she picked up a copy of my first book, Beyond Empowerment, and decided that she wanted to implement self-management. And so she did. She brought her leaders together and they had a book club and they worked through the principles, and then they figured out a plan of attack, and they engaged the colleagues there, and they worked out a plan over 12 months, and they implemented self-management, and they were completely successful. And when I met with her and her leadership team, they said, these principles not only informed our work lives and made our work lives better, but we found that we naturally extended these principles to every other aspect of our lives, our family lives, our civic lives, our community lives, lives with our friends and family. Every aspect of our lives got better as a result of embracing these principles. And so I hope they spread. I hope they spread to every corner of the planet.
So there are a couple of very interesting questions, remarks, exclamations about people wanting to join the Morningstar company. Who wouldn't want to? So while we are at it, I think Mrunal, our colleague, has one last question, and then we conclude with Rajesh coming up after Mrunal. So Mrunal, you can go now.
Hello, Doug. The thing is that whatever you're sharing is so inspiring and so innovative. This question is, for example, I understand this is so much of co-creation that happens at Morningstar. Like you said, a mechanic would hire a mechanic. So the question is, such kind of agreements or this co-creation, what is the process of that where it gets established that, okay, a peer would hire a peer, or we will decide the decisions with the decision rights? How does that get co-created and gets established, and then everybody follows that?
Well, everything happens through dialogue. So, and we are huge believers in commitment making and commitment keeping. And so we have embraced the theories of Fernando Flores. He was Chile's youngest finance minister in the 1970s, went to prison, studied linguistics and computers. He's one of the godfathers of artificial intelligence, but he also studied commitment making and commitment keeping. So we ask each other for commitments in conversation. So I've detected, let's say again, I'm an electrician. I detect a need for additional electrical talent. I enter into dialogue with my fellow electricians. I explain to them the need. If they disagree, we always have the gaining agreement process to resolve a difference of opinion. But assuming that my analysis is correct, we do need additional talent, then I have the obligation to initiate the acquisition of that talent. So I find a talented job description creator, we collect candidates, and I initiate the interview process. I bring my fellow electricians into that process, and then we make a decision. So everything is accomplished through dialogue, through request and response, but fundamentally through commitment making and commitment keeping. Commitments are sacred. If you make a commitment, you must either fulfill the commitment or renegotiate the commitment. And it's very, very deeply about trust and integrity. Excuses have zero value. So we don't ever listen to excuses at Morningstar. They don't have any value. We aren't interested in them. We're interested in trust, integrity, and respect.
Thank you very much. I think Rajesh has a question, and we can conclude right after that.
Yeah, not really a question, Doug. Again, thank you so much. And Morningstar really reaffirms, it reaffirms the belief in human spirit. What you're saying is, let's give human spirit a chance. Let's trust people to do the right things, right? Mm-hmm. At Semco Style Institute, that again is something that we aspire for, to make the world a better place, one organization at a time. Let's bring in humanity and respect into the workplace. So it's so inspiring. Thank you for being an example that that's possible. And let me conclude with one question or a request. Are you thinking of running for the US presidency and mandating self-management across the world or across the US?
No, but with that question, I might have to think about it. That's a great question. I'll give that some thought.
Awesome.
Right.
Awesome. So I'm going to be closely following you, Doug. That's for sure, because I'm going to catch you again in a few days at the Ignite conference. I saw that you're a keynote speaker there, and I've signed up for it. Yeah. So I'll catch you there. So I'm going to follow you. And of course, Rajesh's question actually relates to another question where one of our friends is asking, why don't you advise government organizations also about self-management? And that's right. Running a country is like running a large organization. So if you say that you can scaling is limitless, I think someday we'll get there. Yeah. On that note, from my side, on behalf of Cosmic, all its members, all the guests today, and Semco Style Institute India, thank you very much, Doug. It was wonderful having you here, and we hope to keep in touch and keep interacting with you and hear more about your stories and share our stories as well. Thank you so much. And I love the Indian way of saying.
Thank you.
It's the COVID way of namaskar also. Okay.
Right.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for all our guests as well. You've been a very engaged audience. Thank you so much. Do join us for future Cosmic sessions as well. Thanks. Bye.
Fantastic. Bye.
Have a great weekend. Bye. And good night, everyone else in India. Bye.
Good night, guys.